Namaskar. As per the request of the second semester students of English major of our college, I am here with my presentation on John Donne as a metaphysical poet, or John Donne and metaphysical poetry. Well, before we go to the topic of metaphysical poetry, we have a little information of John Donne's biography. John Donne was the great poet who was born in 1572 and he died in 1631. The timing of his birth was very interesting. It was a time of transition from Renaissance to the Jacobean period. So, he was well aware of both the time, the Renaissance time as well as the following time, which was well reflected in his poetry. By profession, he was a poet. He was also a priest. He belonged to Catholicism, because of which he had to suffer a lot as well. He was also a lawyer. A few information that is important to remember is that in his personal life, though he was extremely religious, but he also led a very bohemian life, the characteristic of which is well reflected in his love poems. Some other points of his personal biography, again related to his personal life. There was some important incident happened in his life. He made an elopement with his beloved. Therefore, he had to face imprisonment as well. When his wife died, leaving behind 7 children, he had also to face very harsh poverty. He wrote different kinds of poems, different genre, subgenre. He wrote satires, love poetry, elegy, sermons. He was equally master of both secular as well as religious poetry. As far as his works are concerned, some of the masterpieces by him, the collection of poems, songs and sonnets, the elegies, epithalamiums, a few marriage songs are there, the divine poems, which deals with some religious poems. He was extremely religious, we cannot forget it. And another collection was holy sonnets. These are some of the remarkable or masterpieces by him. As far as themes are concerned, he dealt with both physical as well as spiritual aspects. Physical and spiritual aspects of love. He gave a new sort of definition of love, which did not exist in the time prior to him. Sexuality, religion, death, the position of man in the universe, man's relation with the universe, man's relation with time, etc. are some of the very crucial themes present in his writing. His rise is often considered as a revolt against the convention of literature or poetic convention of his time. Till his arrival, the Elizabethan mode of poems, Spenserian mode, pastoral mode, or idyllic love poetry, these were very popular. And those modes preferred a very easy, fluent kind of style, and the poets before him used to use some stocked imagery and I talked about the pastoral conventions. But his writing was totally against those conventions. He comes out with a directness in his writing. There was no hypocrisy. He expressed the reality of thought. And his expressions are also very direct and very vivid, very clear. Now, coming to metaphysical poetry. What is metaphysical poetry and how Donne is primarily related to the metaphysical school of poems. Metaphysical poetry is attributed to the school of 17th century poets and their poems. And the leader of this school, which came in the 17th century, early 17th century, the leader of this school of writing called metaphysical poetry was no doubt John Donne. He was the master. The other members that followed Donne and some were his contemporaries, the prominent ones among them were Andrew Marvell, Richard Crashaw, George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, Abraham Cole, etc. In simple words, the definition of metaphysical poetry, it is a kind of poem that deals with the things beyond physical world of senses. Beyond physical world of senses. In other words, you can say abstract things. This point again I will come back to. They normally in their poems explore the spiritual and philosophical world. So, their favorite subject matter or theme are some abstract and philosophical issues like love, religion, God, beauty, death, faith, nature of things, man's place in the universe, etc. Now coming to the word metaphysical, it comes from the term, two terms, meta, which means beyond, physics means physical nature, beyond physical nature, which is not concrete, which cannot be seen or touched. In this sense, metaphysical poetry existed well before Donne or well before the school called metaphysical poet. Example has been given of Milton and his Paradise Lost. Milton often talks about spirituality, God, heaven, man's evolution, etc. But Milton, Dante or Pope, though their subject matter is metaphysical, but they cannot be attached in this group because their technique was different. Metaphysical poetry is not merely the philosophical themes or abstract themes. Metaphysical poetry is equally a distinct and unique style which was established by Donne and his contemporaries. Metaphysical poetry, this phrase was initially coined by Dryden, then again it was confirmed or referred by Dr. Johnson. But unfortunately, they referred this group of poets as metaphysical poets in a derogatory sense. They found these metaphysical poets kind of showy, who were eager to prove their scholasticism or intellectuality. And they were often very artificial in their versification. But of course, they failed to interpret the metaphysical poets properly, which was later proved by T.S. Eliot in 20th century. Again, I will come back to this point. Metaphysical poetry basically refers to the revolutionary style of writing, very unique and innovative characteristics, which we will talk in the next slides. So this is about the definition of metaphysical poetry. Now, some important characteristics of metaphysical poetry. The primary and number one most important characteristic of metaphysical poetry is, of course, conceit. Now, what is conceit? Conceit is just like comparison. As we compare our beloved with a rose, this is comparison, or in poetic term we can say simile. But comparison or simile is that which is a comparison between two even or likely objects, girlfriend or beloved and a rose. Similar kind of evenness is there. But conceit is that comparison which is really different. For example, Donne compares his separation with his beloved with the legs of compass. Now, the pairs of lovers and their relation is compared to the compass, legs of compass. So this is a very unlikely comparison, which was very difficult to understand for the contemporary readers. That's why they were misinterpreted, misread by for nearly 300 years. Only in the modern times they were understood properly, they were accepted properly. So conceit is a comparison between two very unlikely images, very unlikely things. In another poem by Donne, The Flea, here the blood in the belly, inside the belly of the flea, is compared with the bridal bed of the lovers. Very unlikely comparison. Your union with your beloved is so romantic, but he compares with the blood inside the belly of the flea or mosquito. He says the way the mosquito sucks the blood from the lover, then it goes and bites the beloved. Lovers and beloved's blood are beautifully mixed inside the belly of the flea. So this fact is compared with another image, that is bridal bed. In Assamese we say Phul Hajja, where two new lovers are united physically and mentally. So this is compared, very unlikely comparison. So if it is a very unlikely comparison, very extended kind of metaphor, this is conceit, which was a very important characteristic in dance poetry as well. And that is the reason why they also had to face criticism from the ones like Dr. Johnson. He says, heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. He says, this kind of comparison is forced, very unlikely, violently they are compared. So this is the criticism he made. Another very important characteristics of metaphysical poetry is their scholasticism, condensation and learning. Metaphysical poetry is often very difficult because of its intellectual bias. One has to be intellectual and well versed with the knowledge of different branches, because they bring example and comparison from different fields of knowledge. So when you read dance poetry, you find the references, examples from the old world order, medieval world and mythology to the modern world, the world of science. They take example from philosophy, from geography and whatnot. Besides, they also use poetic techniques like paradox, pun, and very subtle, very indirect kind of comparison, which, though written in a very common language, but often a common reader fails to comprehend. So, because they were themselves, Donne was himself very learned. He was himself very learned, both he had the theological knowledge as well as scientific knowledge. Because I told you that he belonged to a time of transition, a time of earlier period, the knowledge of earlier period, medieval knowledge, medieval mythology, this he had, as well as the modern concepts of science, everything he had, the innovations that took place in his time. So all these references comes here. To understand his poetry, therefore, we must be well read, both of the content as well as the stylistic awareness of the poetry. So this is the second characteristic, very intellectual and scholastic feature. Third characteristic is the use of hyperbole. Their poetry or dance poems, you find lot of hyperboles. Hyperbole is very exaggeration. For example, if I compare my beloved with a common natural object, it is fine. But if I compare my beloved, which is with an extremely unlikely object, very exaggerative sense, that is hyperbole. So they give expressions like, I will love you till there is single drop of water in all the oceans. So this kind of very exaggerative things they use. So hyperbole is another important feature. Thereafter, we have another characteristic from metaphysical poetry used by Donne. Typical language and versification. Unlike his predecessors like the Elizabethan poets, their language is often, their diction, their words were often very artificial, classical, typical. Certain words, certain expressions should be used in literature, that was their say. But Donne changed it. He made use of the common language, common man's natural language, colloquial language, which was normally not used in the poetry till his time. And versification, rhyme scheme, is often very shocking. Uneven rhyme scheme. Why? The justification is that his selection of the language, diction and versification is very much related to the thought process. The language, how you are saying is the language. How you are saying, what kind of words you are using. And what you are saying, they should go together. Your topic justifies the language. So this is the credit of Donne. In Donne's poetry, we find language is very much natural with the topic he is talking about. If he is talking about love poetry, love poem, what is his attitude or approach to the love or beloved, accordingly he used the language as well as versification. If he is talking about God and spirituality, the language will be accordingly made. So the thought and language nicely go together, correlate. Another feature of Donne's poem, unique feature of metaphysical poetry, is abrupt and colloquial opening. His openings are kind of 3000 watt bolt electric shock, because they begin a poem in a very shocking manner, in a very unlikely way, directly going to the middle of the story, or in a very harsh kind of ragged verse and harsh language they open, often in a dialogue form. Example has been given to you. There is a poem, the canonization. The poem opens with the expression, "For God's sake, hold your tongue and let me love." He tells his beloved to shut your mouth and let me love you, make love to you. So this is the beginning, you see. Maybe there was a purpose. Maybe if you give this kind of beginning, then the reader's attention will be bring to the point right in the beginning. Another characteristic of Donne's poetry or metaphysical poetry, which is related to the previous point, dramatic feature. Most of his poems are expressed in a dramatic manner, as if we are watching a dramatic scene. Dialogue and monologue, this sort of thing is there. There is a speaker, and you will understand that he is speaking to somebody in a very dramatic manner, passionate, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes very eager, trying to convince the beloved for physical love. So this dramaticness is a very common feature in his poems. Besides, there are some other features which I have enlisted, because there are many features, I cannot go at length. Donne's poems as well as metaphysical poetry, they are very analytical. When you read their poem, they start the poem with a very argumentative manner, with a very contradictory sense. They begin, give a statement. The statement appears to be against the common belief, as if you tend to say that no, you are wrong, Mr. Donne. But then he beautifully proves his point, why he begins the poem in this manner. The statement or the main theme, what he wants to say, his ideology. Line by line, he gives very analytical, very detailed comparison, logic, rationality, beautifully, logic after logic, comparison and example. He will give, and with an analytical manner, when you reach the last line, you beautifully understand why he gave the contradictory statement in the very beginning line. So much analytical his poems are. Passionate is another feature. Donne was extremely passionate. When you read his poems, you find that he was extremely passionate about his beloved. There are so many love poems full of passion. Even towards God, as a religious person also, he was very passionate, very emotional, sometimes very aggressive as well. He can do anything to earn the love of his beloved. Very imaginative. This is another feature. Sometimes you cannot think, that one can think that way to convince the beloved. To convince the beloved for love or physical love, very imaginatively he brings comparison, logical presentation, etc. Emotional, of course, he was very emotional. Particularly his love poems are very emotional. He is not a hypocrite. He is never artificial in his poems. He takes day-to-day example from his own personal life. Day-to-day example. And those day-to-day examples he presents in his poetry. But if you feel to believe that this is a very common thing he is saying here, but the example may be from day-to-day life, very trivial, but the thought, the philosophy in this example is often very profound. If you understand this example, if you understand this metaphor or paradox, you will find that there is a big, profound philosophy. So he can relate the trivial things with the profound philosophies as well. Psychological realism is presented in his poetry. He observes the things from the psychological point of view, what is happening inside the mind of the lover. Beautifully presents the affable inside. But we cannot deny that there is a deep humor and irony. His irony and humor is very subtle. You have to be very intelligent to follow and understand his lines, and then you find that this is ironically, indirectly, there is some criticism of the beloved or the conventional belief. In his poetry, you find often he presents his doubts and anxiety regarding the conventional beliefs. The Platonic concept of love, for example, he had a doubt. Similarly, many popular beliefs are presented in his poems with doubt and anxiety as well. And he clarifies his stand, his view, how he takes from a modern perspective. So, I told you already, doubt or cynical, he was cynical against many of the established beliefs and traditions. So he brought a change in his poetry from classical to personal or individualness. His poems are extremely personal experience and personal ideology has been established. That makes his poems a very individual one, unique one. In conclusion, we can say that indeed metaphysical poetry, and particularly Mr. Donne, John Donne, they brought a powerful movement called metaphysical poetry. But this movement of writing metaphysical poetry was a kind of ahead of time. They were not understood by their contemporary people and even the following generation. In fact, they were misinterpreted, misunderstood for 300 years. But of course, their true value was revived in the 20th century, early 20th century only. And the credit goes to Mr. T.S. Eliot, the modern legend, the modern poet, and Hopkins to some extent. T.S. Eliot, in his essay, The Metaphysical Poets, he proved the true value of John Donne and the metaphysical poets. He said that they were poets in true sense, because they had in their poems a perfect unification of sensibility. Their poems have a blending of feeling and intellect. Unlike many other poets, for example, the romantic poets, if you read a romantic poem, you find only feeling, no intellectualization. And if you read the neoclassical poets like Pope, you find only the intellectualization. But in their poetry, you find both. Feelings are also there, intellectualization is also there, and both are blended beautifully. None appears artificial. So this is what T.S. Eliot said about them, and people understood, and they became popular after 300 years, you can say. Of course, the First World War and the social order, social atmosphere after the First World War also necessitated the revival of the metaphysical spirit. After the First World War, there was a common kind of atmosphere where people liked witticism in poetry, elaborate simile, abruptness. These are the features of that period, modern poetry, which was first used by Donne and the metaphysical poets. So, T.S. Eliot and Hopkins himself wrote many poems where you find many of the characteristics of the metaphysical poetry, just I mentioned. So, T.S. Eliot or Hopkins or many other modern poets, and indirectly First World War, actually together they returned or brought back the true honor to Donne and the metaphysical poets. So this is all about Mr. Donne and metaphysical poetry in brief. Before I go to his poems in my next classes, hope you can follow, hope you understand a little. If you have doubts, of course we will have interaction and clarify the points. Thank you.